Hi everybody, can you hear me? I guess you can hear me. I don't have my microphones on yet. Okay, hi everybody, can you hear me? Oh, I have 9 people attending now. That's terrific. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And thank you for being patient. I originally scheduled this at 9 o'clock and I wasn't able to make it at 9 because I couldn't get enough things done before coming on. Well, tonight's topic is operational constraints and also political constraints. And it's important to clarify those because this distinction is very important to MMT in the field of economics. Okay, when MMT views the current way of doing things in our public financing system, it looks at the system as one where debt issuance is sustainable forever and does not impair fiscal sustainability. Okay, and I, of course, generally agree with that particular characterization. Now, the intent is never to say that due to strange decisions by our politicians, okay, that it's impossible to default, okay, that it's impossible to make the fiscal situation an unsustainable one if the politicians do the wrong things. Okay, the intention is not to deny that. It's simply to say that under normal financial conditions, under the kinds of practices we have now, normal deficit spending would be sustainable forever. Okay, now Warren Mosler speaks actually in very specific terms about that. He says that there is no operational constraint on our public financing system so long as we follow a zero interest rate and issue only 3-month debt instruments at a zero rate. In other words, he thinks that that is fiscally sustainable forever. Okay, and that there would be no problems with it. Okay, so he thinks that from the financial point of view, from the economics point of view, then we have a situation where the issuance of debt is sustainable. And this is especially true because the debt itself has nothing to do with actually funding the spending. In other words, taxes don't fund spending. Okay, and also the money that comes to the Treasury through the issuance, okay, of debt instruments also does not fund spending. What the debt is about instead, and what taxes are about too, is to drain financial resources from the system and fight inflation, stop inflation, actually, control inflation. And I completely agree. This is quite right. Okay. Okay. And so he says, with this kind of reasoning, okay, and MMTers all agree that the size of the debt and also the debt to GDP ratio does not affect the fiscal capability of the government to spend. Okay, so that's the normal MMT position, and that's what an operational constraint is, okay, in that particular situation. Now, there is one very significant political constraint on that. And that political constraint is the existence of a debt ceiling law, which, using normal practices, okay, of spending, would stop the executive branch from spending its congressional mandates if it was not able to issue debt instruments prior to the Federal Reserve actually doing what it needs to do to fill the Treasury spending account. Okay. So the existence of the debt ceiling law then illustrates a political constraint in the normal account, okay, of MMT writers. Okay, it's a constraint that can be easily repealed by Congress. It's a constraint that can be relaxed by Congress simply by raising the debt ceiling whenever Congress wants to do so. So you can see it's clearly tied to political action, and that makes it a political constraint, okay, and not a financial constraint. It's not a financial constraint on our fiat sovereign system, okay, according to this, but only a political constraint. Okay, so here we go. I've recently been talking about a solution to the problem, okay, of how are we going to pay for it. And at the same time, a solution to the problem of the existence of the national debt. And what I've been saying is that the very existence of the national debt is Congress's fault. And the reason why it's Congress's fault is because in an afternoon, Congress can make it a standard practice to include the following clause or an alternative formulation meaning the same thing. Okay, by the way, am I showing, did I forget to show myself? I think I did show myself here. So I think I am in the stream. Very good. And the language that needs to be included in such a bill is here in this particular graphic. Okay, let me hide myself for a second so you can cogitate on this graphic, which should now be filling the screen, I believe. Did this the wrong way. Should now be filling the screen. You shouldn't be able to see me if everybody, okay, is working right. Okay, if everything, okay, is working right in the broadcast. So the language is, upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve Bank with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. That takes care of the need to issue any further debt instruments when one is deficit spending. Okay, the second clause is, in addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury Reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. And so that takes care of paying off the debt over time as it falls due. So eventually, there would be no debt instruments, and there would be no political constraint coming from the perceived problem of the debt as a constraint on spending. The fact that people identify the debt with their own household debt and think instinctively the government should not have any debt, or should have only very low debts, and that it's been profligate, it hasn't been fiscally responsible, okay, and so on. That is a political problem standing in the way of passage of good progressive legislation. Okay, and we've been fighting battles against this for years and years and years. So in my proposal recently, what I suggest is a letter writing campaign, actually a certified letter writing campaign. Hat tip to Lanadell for the suggestion that it should be a certified letter writing campaign, and hat tip to her also for setting up the Facebook page for this as well. And so, okay, the letter contains two essential aspects, or ought to contain two essential aspects, and I'm looking for customized letters, individual customized letters. The first element is the language I suggested just above. In fact, that is still inhabiting the screen right now, but which I will take off. Okay, so there I am again. I think. I am there now, I think. Okay, so, okay, and then I also suggest that there be a demand in the letter saying that if the congressperson involved refuses to include the new language, okay, in all the appropriation bills, and then the constituent that is writing the letter will do all they can to replace the congressperson in office with somebody else who promises to place the language in all appropriations bills. So there's a political threat, okay, that's involved. Well, there was a thread on Facebook a few days back now, and the threat was about the financing problems. Okay, the thread was about financing problems, okay, and so on. And Warren was commenting on the thread, and Sam Hollenbeck was also commenting on the thread. And Sam commented on Warren's suggestion that there be a zero interest rate permanent policy to make the debt completely sustainable. Okay, and he told Warren what my proposal was, and quoted the language also. And Warren replied, and he said, "As with the platinum coin, I am not against, but they both cater to the idea that there is some kind of operational constraint that needs to be addressed to ensure normal deficit spending can continue, which isn't the case. So, in other words, what Warren is saying is that the message has to be gotten out that there is no operational constraint here, that with respect to debt financing, we're always dealing with a political constraint and not with an operational constraint. Okay, to define these constraints in a more formal way, operational constraints on normal deficit spending are those inherent to the financial regime of a nation or a political system, while political constraints are those established by political actors who create such constraints or refuse to overcome those kinds of constraints based on choices they can make while they are in office. So there's the element, okay? There's a voluntary element to the political constraints, while with respect to the operational constraints, there has to be an involuntary element, something that's inherent in the financial regime itself. So keeping those distinctions in mind here, let's then address the realities. Okay, so first, it's clear that if you consider normal deficit spending to be deficit spending which is accompanied by the issuance of debt by the Treasury Department. And whenever they deficit spend and they don't have the money in their account, they issue debt. Okay, now we know better than to think that the money raised by the debt instruments actually gets to the Treasury spending account. It doesn't get to that account. So it's not actually the money that is spent from that account into the country. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the debt instruments are draining money out of the economy as a hedge against inflation. Okay? Okay, so that's the normal process. Now the question is, are there operational constraints on that process? Okay, I think there's one. Okay, and I think that one is caused by the existence of a debt ceiling law. And since the debt ceiling is written into the law at this point and has been in place for a very long time now and has caused serious fiscal crises again and again and again, what I'm contending is that we have to consider the debt ceiling and the presence of it as part of the normal deficit spending process. So that means that normal process is not currently a sustainable process without a political change. Okay. Okay, now here we get into the ambiguity of what's a political change, okay, and what's a legal change. In other words, are we going to consider a legal change to be a political change? Well, sure, it's a political change, but it's not like the following situation. As Warren mentioned, I value platinum coins. $20 trillion platinum coins, $30 trillion platinum coins, 60 trillion platinum coins, $100 trillion platinum coins to fill the public purse so that the money would already be there when Congress actually did an appropriation. Fine. So the important thing to note here is that that law is currently in place. It is, from a legal point of view, a part of the financial regime that we have now. Now, from the point of view of practice, it's not a part of the financial regime because the president and the Secretary of the Treasury hasn't actually used the law for the purpose that I proposed. Okay, so from the point of view of practice, it's not part of the customary regime. On the other hand, the debt ceiling law is part of the customary regime. Okay? But, okay, so here's the paradox in terms of what's operational, okay, and what is only political. Okay? There's a law that exists where there's only a political barrier preventing its use, only the decision of a single political actor, specifically the President of the United States. Okay, and that is the platinum coin law. Now, the platinum coin law is part of our current law. So therefore, from a legal point of view, it's part of our fiscal regime, actually right now. The only reason why people won't use it is because they have scruples of a political kind. They're tying their own shoelaces, actually deliberately not to use that. Okay, because they think all kinds of strange things are going to happen if they do. Okay, so what I would say is that in that situation, there is a purely political constraint. But in the situation of the debt ceiling law, it's more than purely a political constraint. It's a larger order political constraint, specifically one that requires new legislation to get rid of. And the debt ceiling law has been part of our financial regime now since 1917, I believe, or 1916. So it's more than 100 years old. Okay? We would not make things truly sustainable. We would not make our normal fiscal practice truly sustainable until we repeal the debt ceiling law. Okay, now, I consider that what we face with the debt ceiling law, okay, or with our normal financial practice not being operationally sustainable. I wouldn't say that it's not operationally sustainable. Okay, what I would say is that it is operationally sustainable because all it faces is a political constraint, and that political constraint is getting rid of the debt ceiling law. I would consider that a political constraint. It may be a greater political constraint, a higher barrier to overcome from a legal point of view than the political constraint stopping the use of the platinum coin to try to overcome fiscal crises. But I consider them both to be political constraints. Okay, and so I think that it's not correct to say that there are no operational constraints on sustainability at this point if you're going to consider the framework, okay, of operational practice to be the difference between the current legal framework, okay, and a legal framework that we have to establish. Okay, if you're going to consider the distinction to be that, then you have to apply that distinction consistently. And it seems like the political constraints on the platinum coin are of a lower order than the political constraints that are on the issuance, okay, of debt, the normal continuance, okay, of issuance of debt, okay, because to establish that on a continuing and sustainable basis, you would actually have to change the law. Okay? All right. Now let's go to the new solution, okay, that I suggested. That's the inclusion of very simple kinds of legal language in all the appropriations bills. And I showed that language to you earlier. Okay, now, why is that language not now in the appropriations bills? That language is not in the appropriations bills because there's a political constraint. Congress is refusing to pass that. So there's no operational constraint in the system, which is actually barring that. I mean, after all, the Constitution allows it. So theoretically, the financial system should be able to put that language in all the appropriations bills, which would then obviate the need to ever issue debt instruments. Now, that doesn't mean the federal government couldn't issue debt instruments if it wanted to. It could still issue debt instruments. It wouldn't be prevented by the financial regime from continuing to issue debt instruments. But in a new situation, after the language is passed, it would probably choose not to. Because it would then look silly if it issued the debt instruments. It would have to explain that. And also because the Federal Reserve would still have to drain money out of the economy, and it would be paying interest on reserves at probably roughly the same level, okay, as the interest that would be paid on the debt instruments, which would be, according to Warren's policy, actually very close to zero. So functionally, the two situations would not be very different. What I'm basically trying to point out here is that the distinction between operational factors or the operational system as opposed to the political and the legal underpinnings, that is a muddy distinction at best. Okay, now, I know that what Warren actually has in mind here is not a simple distinction between the operational aspects and the political aspects or the legal aspects. But what he really has in mind is a distinction that he would like to make between the customary practices surrounding federal spending and any new practices, okay, which may be introduced. That's the real distinction here. And what Warren is really looking at is making a minimal change to the current practices in order to make the financial system a more sustainable one and to give the Treasury a substantial role in fiscal policy and take the pressure that's placed on the Treasury off it by basically limiting the freedom of the Federal Reserve, because it would have to constrain its interest rates to zero, okay, from then on. Okay, and he's saying that's just a little glitch in the system we have to change there, okay, because in order to get that done, we'd have to get rid of the debt ceiling law, or make it the lifting of the debt ceiling automatic. In other words, when we approach the debt ceiling, okay, it would automatically be raised. Okay. So, okay, what he's saying is that's a minimal disruption of our customs. And so he thinks that would be more politically acceptable than all the solutions that I advance. And I think that's what he really has in mind. But what he's also talking about is the following. He's concerned that in presenting the case for the platinum coin, and or presenting the case for the new language in the law, what I'm doing is feeding the frame that the existence of the debt is itself a fiscal problem, is itself a public financing problem. And that in trying to get these practices changed to my practices, that I'm basically reinforcing the frame that the debt is evil, okay, and that it ought to be paid off, that it's a real problem, it's a real financing problem that we have to solve. Well, of course, I'm not contending that. I don't think the debt is a financing problem that we have to solve, or at least I think the solution to it is a very simple one, okay, as I've outlined here, almost a trivial one, even though it would involve a legal change, okay? And so, okay, I'm not really contending that the very existence of the debt is a financial problem. In fact, I think the opposite. Okay, I think it is not a financial problem, or as I call it, it's a faux financial problem. Okay, but I think it's a real political problem. Why is it a real political problem? Because the existence of the debt and its growth over the years has for many years been used as a rationalization for blocking progressive fiscal spending on all kinds of things that we need. It's a political problem. We have to solve the political problem. And what Warren is saying is that if we try to solve the political problem, even though we say it's a political problem, okay, and not a financial problem, to the public at large, it will seem that we're reinforcing the frame that this is a financial problem, and that the very existence of the debt is bad, okay, or is evil, or is something that our financial system cannot handle. And he's saying we should not feed that particular frame. Now, what I say in reply is really very simple. If we put in the two clauses that I suggest into all the appropriations bills passed from now on, or as close to now on, okay, as we can get it, then what's going to happen is, with each passing month, we will see the debt actually going down. And as it goes down, and it will go down very, very rapidly, in 3 months' time, we pay off trillions of dollars, okay, of debt. Okay, in the first year, I don't know what we pay off in debt. It might be $6 trillion or something like that. It's a very, very large amount. I could check. Okay, I haven't checked. Within 3 years, we would probably have paid off close to a half of the debt. We'd have to wait a longer time for the other debts because their terms are longer. There's 5-year debt, okay, and 10-year debt, and I think there's also 25-year debt, okay, and 30-year debt. I'm not even sure what's being sold right now. Okay. But assume that the debt with the longest term that the Treasury Department has now is 30 years out, then we wouldn't be finished actually getting rid of the debt for 30 years. It would still be with us. But of course, it would be with us as the months and as the years go by at an increasingly low level. Now, here's what I think. We have been saying and trying to educate people, the MMT writers, trying to persuade them or get them to learn, okay, that the debt is a faux problem, that it's really no problem at all, okay, that it's trivial. Okay? It's a trivial problem to solve. Okay, and meanwhile, the Petersonians and all the debt hawks and all the debt terrorists have been saying, no, 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 it's the greatest problem of the age. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to burden our grandchildren, okay, and it's going to kill us because we're going to collapse as a financial system, as a public financing system. The debt is unsustainable, unsustainable. Our time horizons, if we project everything out to our time horizons, we have hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt we're going to burden future generations with. It's a crisis, and we're failing to meet that crisis, and we're fiscally irresponsible. That's what they're telling people. And we're telling people, no, that's false. Now, what I'm asking is, yes, we may initially be slightly feeding the debt frame because we're asking the congressman to put this language in so the debt can be paid off. So there might be a slight feed of that frame, which right now is the dominant frame. But what is a better way to get rid of a false frame than to confront it with the actual experience of people? Once this legislation is passed, all we really have to do is to keep up like a drumbeat, month after month, how much of the debt was paid off this month, how much of the debt was paid off after 2 months, how much was paid off after 3 months, after 6 months, after a year, after 2 years, after 3 years. Keep it up like a drumbeat. Show them the daily Treasury statement each month to show them how much debt has been paid off. Publicize it. Spread it all over the internet. When that happens, when that happens, and as that happens, it will be the experience of people that, well, the debt was always a trivial problem. We could have always put this simple language into legislation to get rid of the debt problem. That will become a part of their experience. We will propagandize it. We will see to it that they understand that that debt that was supposed to be such a major problem threatening us all was being easily paid off without effort and without increases in taxing and without inflation because it was being paid off as it falls due. So even though there might be an original reinforcement of the frame while we fight the political battle, that political battle itself, that reinforcement of the strain, strengthens us in the political battle. Because we're saying to people, yes, if you think that is a serious problem, okay, we're not going to disagree with you on that. We don't really think it's a serious problem, but if you think it's a serious problem, we're going to do what you want. We're going to put in this language, and we're going to get rid of the debt. And you'll see that it was never a serious problem at all. You'll see it. You'll see it wasn't a serious problem, because we're going to pay it off, start paying it off so fast that your head will spin. After 6 months, your head is going to spin at the reduction of the debt after 6 months. I mean, we'll tell them that. And so they'll want this language more and more while we're campaigning for it. And if we ever do get it in, and it ever does happen that the outstanding debt is paid down as rapidly as it would be under this particular scheme, the cognitive dissonance that people who believed the fairy stories about the debt would experience would be monumental. I think belief in the severity of the debt problem, and its power in Washington to govern what Congress people do, that would disappear within 3 months if we ever got this into law. The Peterson foundations and associated groups could never recover from that, because people's experience would be that look how easily we're paying off this debt. Look how badly we were lied to for years and years and years. Look how often they refused to spend for things we needed because they were telling this debt fairy story, which turned out to be a lie or a myth, or in any case, a grossly false narrative. That's what would be getting shown to people. So the frame would be broken, most likely within the first 3 months after passage of this. So isn't it worth a little reinforcement of the frame on the journey to get the bill passed in order to see that kind of rapid reduction in the strength of the frame? I mean, belief in that frame would fall through the floor within 3 months. I'm telling you, that's what would happen. That's what the result would be. And what is the result after that frame fails? The result is that we will have demonstrated to people, we will have demonstrated to them in a way that Warren's solution would not, because the debt would remain in that solution. But we would have demonstrated to them that a nation that has a sovereign currency can always create the reserves and the currency in the narrow sense that it needs in order to buy whatever is for sale in its own currency. That is one of the central tenets of MMT we're trying to teach people. And I'm saying that if we get this language in, we can teach them that through experience, through relatively easy communication. Whereas if Warren's zero interest rate program, which maintains the level of the debt and allows it to increase as government spending increases, that kind of practice would not have that. They still would look at the debt And they would see it going up and up and up. And the propagandists on the other side could use that to slow down the deficit spending, to deprive us of the things we need. So Warren's zero interest rate policy gives no solution to the political problem. Perhaps it doesn't reinforce the frame that the debt is a serious problem. It works against that frame because it ignores the frame. But at the same time, it does nothing concretely to persuade people that the frame, that this enormous debt is going to choke us one day. It does nothing to persuade them that this will not be the case. Because they'll look at the larger and larger and larger debt over time, and the propagandists will be telling them that they're going to have to pay all this off through increases in taxes. That each man, woman, and child will not owe $60,000, as they say roughly now, but every man, woman, and children will owe $100,000, and then $150,000, and then $200,000. We'll still be hearing that nonsense. Whereas if we go with the solution that I suggested, then we maybe don't disturb the frame right at the beginning in proposing the solution. But we kill the frame within 3 months. We kill it. We get rid of it. It never bothers us again. And we're free to teach the monetary sovereignty truths of MMT and the rest of MMT too. So, my friends, what's not to like? What's not to like? Now, okay, I'm going to open this up to a Q&A, okay, at this point. Okay, the attendance I had here tonight, okay, was very low. I don't know exactly why. Perhaps people will be able to explain it. But I really need you to share when we're done with this. Because this is a very important video. It explains why ultimately there is no strengthening of the debt frame, but ultimately, and in not too long a time, there's a breaking of the debt frame. That's why we need to use the new language. We need to pay off the debt. We need to kill the debt as a political issue. And that's why I'm calling on everybody to support this campaign of certified letters. It's going to be a continuing campaign. These letters are going to go forth in waves until the deed is done and they put that language in the appropriations bills for good. Okay, I'm now going to open it up to Q&A or to comments, okay, or whatever. I see Real Progressive saying the first clause orders the Federal Reserve to credit the reserves of the Treasury account necessary. So deficit spending with no bonds to offset and pay off our existing bonds. And that's what Rocco says. Yes. Yes, Rocco, that is what it says. And you are correct. And Russell says, when do we start to mail our certified letters? Not yet. Okay, I don't want to be in a hurry about this. What I want to do is to get a large membership for our group in the thousands. People from all over the country, and not just from RP. Lots of people, okay, are against the debt. Okay. We want to get a coalition together for this, okay, of people. We want to get many, many different certified letters, sample letters done. I've only provided the first of these. We need modifications of these. Okay, I saw a modification today by Mark Collins. That was just fine. And we need other modifications too. I want to see 20 to 25 sample letters that are circulating but have the essential elements in them. And then I want the sample letters to be individually customized by each person so that the tone of those letters is the person's tone. I don't want the Congress people to think that they're in any way getting a form letter, but that each individual is taking the time to write a letter and that each individual is paying the money for return receipt requested or certified mail. We have yet to make a decision as to which of these we're going to try to require, okay, of people. But it's important that there be some money spent, because the way congressmen think, if some money is spent on something by the public, they must really care about it. Okay. What I'd really love to do, if we can possibly do it, is to get 20,000 people all over the country doing this. I want to see these letters actually flooding Congress. Now, I don't think it's important to make this happen in a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, okay, or 3 months. Of course, I'd like to see it happen in such a short time. Anybody would. But it's likely going to take a good deal of work before we get enough people to do the waves. What I have in mind at this point is monthly waves, or maybe more frequent waves than that. We have to decide this in the group. We'll discuss it and we'll decide it, okay, among ourselves. I don't have a right answer now. I don't know if there is a right answer. But what I'm envisioning is monthly waves, okay? And maybe not at some specified time each month, but waves in response to obnoxious things done by the Congress, which involve the rationale of the national debt. In other words, responses to events. If there's an event which is abusive and which involves an appeal to the national debt, boom, there's a wave of letters, okay, that go out so that Congress people know they're getting these letters whenever they F up. These letters are going out there. And they're going to be going all over the country, and people are going to be taking notice as to who the congressmen were who did not put that language into the appropriations. That's the kind of thing that I want to see happen. So I think this has to be a sustained effort. It has to be a large effort. It may take us 3 months to build. It may take us 6 months to build. It may take us 9 months to build. But however long it takes us, it's going to be worth it, because it's going to be a flood of angry people that they're going to see with these particular letters. Okay, so let's see who else is in. Mark Fabian says, this letter to senators and congressmen needs to be a national campaign. Yes, Mark, I completely agree with you. It needs to be a national campaign. And national campaigns take time to build. They can't be built overnight very easily. And somebody just asked, Kathy Langan, strange, such a low turnout. Yeah, I thought it was kind of strange. It's really higher now than it's been all night at 40 people or so. Okay, so yeah, and the 74 comments is also a low for one of my broadcasts. It's almost as if, well, I'm not even going to speculate on why it's so low. I didn't give a lot of warning on this. Okay, I decided to do it something like 7:30, and I had to pull what I wanted to say together, and so it took some time. And then I scheduled it for 9 o'clock. I wasn't able to make it at 9 o'clock, so people might have figured, well, it's not really coming off after all. So I can't say why. Okay, exactly. But anyway, that's the story. My comment space appears to be highly constricted tonight, and I'm not sure why that is, but here we go. I'm having trouble seeing the comments. So if I fail to get to your comments, it may be because I can't see them. Maybe I should just show all of them. Yes, love. I guess Gates loved the idea being said here. Maybe I can. I can't read the small print on the screen. Love the group. Unfortunately, I can show you the screen, but I cannot read what's on the screen. And for some reason, BeLive is not showing my the comments as they're coming in. I mean, it's showing the comments, but I mean the space is so small. Okay, when I use the arrows, I'm not getting my normal space, and I don't know why. Anyway, I'll keep trying. Molly Scarborough, Facebook messaging. Can we have Facebook messaging to Congress members? Okay, I think some messaging on this, is bound to get out. Okay, I know a person or two has already sent in a certified letter, to Congress, but using the sample letter. So some leakages are going to occur as we build up, but these are going to be isolated instances. They're not going to have a lot of effect on Congress. They won't be widely talked about. They won't be widely perceived. If there's a Facebook campaign about it, that may get some more attention and help us to build a little bit. But any early efforts going out there, I think, will have the effect more of getting more people to sign up for our group. That's what's at issue here. Okay, I think it's going to do more good for the size of our group than it will do in terms of actually influencing Congress people. Okay, but also not just, for our group. It's important to begin, I think, by going after new congressional candidates who are trying to overturn people within the Democratic Party and who are progressive. They have every reason to want to pick up on this campaign and to reflect the perspectives of the campaign. And the reason why is that they can blame the incumbents they're running against for the debt. They bear part of the responsibility for the existence of the national debt because they never passed any language like this before. It's very simple. Okay, and there's, Nancy Pelosi. Her butt is hanging out because her career has been totally committed to the pay-go provisions in Congress. The heart of the austerity orientation in Congress comes from the pay-go provisions in the bill that try to require deficit neutrality for all bills. So Nancy Pelosi can be attacked on pay-go when she could have placed this language inside of appropriations bills. So this can be a differentiating factor for all the progressive candidates across the country to distinguish themselves from the conventional Democrats. But Amy Vilela, who's running in the Nevada race, where the incumbent is Ruben Kihuen, she saw this language and she immediately said, I'll go for that. I'll support that. I presume she saw the potential in the language for her. Perhaps she thought it was something for her to run on. I hope so, because I think it is something for her to run on as one of the things to distinguish herself from Rubin. Of course, she's also very strong in the Medicare for All area, and that's an important way to distinguish herself from Rubin. Okay, so Mark Collins says, we still have many committed to sending letters. Yes, we do. We have to make alliances with other groups in the progressive community. For example, the groups that were trying to put together the People's Convergence Movement, and who are trying to put together a People's Party right now, or perhaps a Popular Front. There's no reason why people interested in a Popular Front should not be tying into this. Teresa Sanders says, even I can afford, I guess, to send a certified letter, is what I think she was trying to say. Don't know why I can't see the comments tonight. Yeah, Be Live is just getting really worse and worse with each passing week. Maybe I'll be able to see them better if I reduce the size of the comments. Okay. Yes, I can see this better. Now I can read Teresa's comments, which is better to take time to iron things out. Yes, I agree. It's better to take time. And Russell Goldman says, I'll start working to put the form letter in my own words. Absolutely. And I'm going to write some alternative samples also myself. Mark Collins says, please help recruit from states not yet represented so that at least one letter goes to all the senators and the representatives. Yes, I agree. Jenna Colby, where is the list of states? We have a spreadsheet on this. Okay, I don't know if it's up on the page yet, but I think it is. Okay, and there is that. And Russell says, it's Thursday and not your regular time slot. Yeah, I know that's true, but of course, increasingly, I've been live streaming at other times also. I do have a big show planned for Saturday night, okay, at 8, but it won't be on this topic. It's going to be on climate change and the Trump administration. And also, Michael Hexter is coming back to do that show with me. So it's going to be a dynamite show then. And Mark Fabian, who was kind enough to put up the link. The Progressive says, dang, keep getting booted, but I copied a shortened version. Just food for thought. I didn't write it. It's Joe's letter, just shortened a bit. If it has the two essential elements, Rocco, I'm sure it'll be just fine. Okay, I will take a look though. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of shortened sample letters. I certainly hope that there would be, because I recognized, okay, that my letter was a little bit long in the tooth. So, somebody else is putting the clause up. Oh, that's probably Rocco saying, I, your constituent, have heard this fiscal responsibility from you for many years now, including your sentiments about how much you hate the national debt and deficit spending, what evils they are, and how much we have to lighten the debt burden on our grandchildren. Given all this from you, it surprised me greatly to learn recently that the very existence of the national debt is Congress's fault, including your own and your colleagues. I say this for a very simple reason. The reason is that you and your colleagues are the only ones with authority to create debt and can, in an afternoon, make it a standard legislative practice to eliminate it with the following clause and an alternative formulation meaning the same thing in every appropriation bill or continuing resolution for federal spending. The clause is, and then Rocco includes the clause, and then he says what the first clause does, what the first sentence does, what the second sentence does. Then he goes on, if this or similar language were included in every such bill, it would mean that one, deficit spending by Congress would no longer involve issuing new debt instruments, so the debt would no longer grow, and that all outstanding debt instruments would be paid as they fall due, as long as Congress continues to include the new language in all its appropriations bills and continuing the resolutions. So it seems to me that the sole reason why the national debt exists at all in 2017 is that when President Nixon took the United States off the gold standard in 1971, the Congress did not adjust to the new reality of fiat money sovereignty by funding federal spending using language like the above. And yeah, that's a shortened version, and of course it's just fine. It has the essential elements in it. Well, I guess not all the essential elements. I didn't see the threat. I think at the end of these things, there has to be a threat to these congressmen that if they don't comply with this, they're going home. They're going home. Well, they're going to K Street to lobby unsuccessfully from now on. And Carmen says several other live streams are going on. Oh, I see. Probably other live streams are interfering with this. I didn't know there were other live streams. I spoke to schedulers before this, and just about an hour and a half before I came on. And at that time, there were no other live streams that were going on. I said mine would be about 9 o'clock or so. So, okay, I didn't know why it didn't show. Anyway, what Rocco says is that the info will still be on record, Joe. At least you got it out on the live stream. Yes, I did. Okay. Perhaps I should have saved it for Saturday night, but I wanted to do the climate change thing on Saturday night. I promised that show as a return appearance for Michael Hexter. Molly Scarborough says, "Oh my God, he is so freaky cute." Who's that, Molly? Anyway, Real Progressives. That's about the letter campaign group. Oh, great. Oh, that must be Rocco, who's so cute. Yeah. Trish Roberts. Yes, the comment section is small on Be Live. Yeah, it is. You can hardly see anything sometimes. But I learned something today, and that is that if I kick it down to 80%, I can see better. So that worked better. So thanks, Trish, for reinforcing what I learned. Yes, the net neutrality protest at Verizon stores is happening. Well, that certainly dwarfs this in importance. for now anyway. I have time to repeat this. And Barry says, did Joe go on? I didn't get a notification. Yes, Barry, I did go on. But of course, I can't answer that here because he's in regular Facebook, so I'm sure somebody will tell him that. So Molly said, I agree, Joe, about the Facebook messaging. And Carmen says, can we start a thread or group on Reddit? Or is that a good idea? I don't know much about that social medium. Okay, I vaguely remember that it's always good to start a thread or a group on Reddit, but I'm not sure of the details here and how to coordinate it with the Facebook group. And I think it should be coordinated with the Facebook group, and that we should be coordinating with RP, because this is really a way to accelerate the education, okay, that RP is trying to get out there. Okay. Well, I don't know, Carmen. I think it's a good question, and I think that we can take it up as we go forward and we can answer it. Rocco says, Carmen, have you joined our Facebook group, RP Certified Letters? Real Progressive says, we need tons of regular people understanding and speaking about our operational reality. That is how we made it politically safe enough for Bernie Sanders, how we make it politically safe enough for Bernie Sanders to say it out loud. Yes, I think we will enable him to say it out loud. Mark Fabian says, I agree. Those new candidates need vetted with MMT-based questions. We need new candidates to understand macroeconomic truth and who will pledge to spend for public purpose. They must pledge to get Joe's language into every bill. Yes, I think that's important, and I do want to add something with respect to public purpose as well. Okay, I spoke before about the importance, okay, to MMT of the idea of sovereign fiat money, okay, the idea, okay, of being a monetary sovereign. Okay, but I think we also have to recognize and to ask ourselves, with respect to this campaign, where public purpose actually fits in. Okay, because it seems to me that the highest, okay, of MMT values, the highest level of MMT value is economics for the public purpose. That original idea stated by John Kenneth Galbraith in the 1970s and going forward. The MMT critique on some of the other schools, okay, of economics starts with the idea that they're not doing economics for the public purpose. Now, here's the question that I want to ask you all to consider, and everybody who sees this later to consider as well. Which is more consistent with the public purpose? Refusing to temporarily reinforce the frame that debts and deficits are bad, and then breaking that frame, and then failing to break that frame, okay, or accepting a temporary reinforcement of the frame and succeeding 3 months later in actually breaking that frame entirely. I don't think there's much doubt which course of action is more consistent with the public purpose. I think that course is getting rid of the debt, and with it, the debt issue for good, and getting on with the job of considering fiscal policy on its merits and not on the basis of what it's going to do to the national debt. We need to forget about that. We need to forget about that. We need to kill that. We need to get on with something else. Teresa Sanders says we should get this out to every progressive running. It would be a toe into really educating them about MMT. And Beverly Couch says, hashtag a litmus test. Indeed, litmus test. Also, I want to say, this hashtag litmus test for this particular policy is more important than explicitly advocating for it as an MMT thing. Okay, and the reason is that the language used in the legislation is not explicitly MMT language. It's just language that's constitutional. It's based on Article 1, Section 8, and what the powers of Congress are. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution actually established the monetary sovereignty of the United States. It's in our founding document. That monetary sovereignty was given away at various times by going onto the gold standard. Our Congress gave it away at various times, just as people are now trying to give it away by terrorizing us with the debt stuff. And this is a real old story to prevent getting the net financial assets to the people, something the founders provided for in the Constitution. So this is not just about MMT. It's about the Constitution. It's about our national rights to create our own money and use that money for the general welfare. And if that sounds a bit like MMT getting used for the public purpose, well, I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. So get with it, folks. This is about the public purpose. And MMT is for the public purpose. So what I'm suggesting is completely consistent with MMT. Completely consistent with MMT. And if anybody else wants to challenge that view, bring it. Rob, Yoda, the only concern I have with the new approach about paying off the imaginary debt. Okay, let's get this clear. Okay, the debt instruments may not be like your debt and my debt, because the United States is a monetary sovereign and because the debt money never gets to the spending account anyway. That's true. Well, that's true. But the debt is not an imaginary debt, from the standpoint of the creditors who bought those debt instruments. No more than the debt a bank has to you when you buy a CD at that bank. That CD is a liability of the bank. It's a debt of the bank. And the debt instruments sold to companies and to foreign nations are debt instruments, and to banks for that matter. Those are liabilities of the federal government that the Treasury Department has to pay back as they fall due. So in that sense, that debt is not imaginary. There is a debt subject to the limit number or total produced by the Treasury Department every day. Now, that may not have the same connotation of hardship and difficulty in repaying as the debt that I have, or the debt that you have, or the debt that we all have. No, it has an entirely different connotation. And Bill Mitchell is right when he says that debt is not the debt. Yes, it really is not debt as we know debt. But it is debt in the sense that the Treasury spending account is going to have the money in it that's necessary to have in it when its debt instruments fall due for repayment. That is a reality. It is not imaginary. How do we deal with inflation at that point? Do we raise taxes to stop consumption? No, there won't be any inflation from that. The reason why there won't be any inflation directly from that is because that is only a portfolio change. Okay, in other words, the owners of the debt, just before the debt instrument is paid off by the federal government, the owners of the debt have those debt instruments in their accounts. If they want to get cash for those debt instruments, they can sell that cash at any time, sell those debt instruments at any time. If they don't want to sell the debt instruments, they can leverage them more than once to get loans from private banks if they need money. So there isn't going to be a sudden influx of new money into the economy. What's going to happen initially is that in the account of the creditor that formerly had the debt instrument, there will now be reserves. Whether the creditor spends those reserves into the economy or not, that's going to be up to the creditor, and there'll be no special reason to spend them into the economy as long as the Federal Reserve is paying interest on reserves at a rate comparable to the rate of interest they were getting with the debt instruments. There should be no additional inflation from that. The only additional inflation can be caused by deficit spending beyond the full employment level, as usual, or by cost, or resulting from cost push inflation. But just from paying off the debt itself as it falls due, there'll be no inflation at all. And if you doubt that based on what I've just said here, then read my book on fixing the debt. I have a chapter in there. And in that chapter, I go through the causes of inflation, and I go through the likely effects of the platinum coin on inflation, because the platinum coin, of course, the revenues from that would also be used to pay down the debt as it falls due. So I address this very issue there, and I go through the causal chains, and I explain why. Just paying back the debt as it falls due cannot cause any more inflation than we normally get. No additional inflation. Okay, Rob, in World War II, the U.S. did both. Yes, that's true. Tricia Roberts says, haha. And Allison Drucker says, I think Samuel Robb actually did an RP on Reddit. And Rob Rivera said, would this pose international problems or trade issues? Since the current bonds or other debt instruments are being paid off when they come due, then wouldn't it make it difficult to transact in our currency space since it won't be out there? Our currency would pretty much be in circulation primarily domestically, but potentially not that much internationally. Well, I don't see why it would have that effect, Rob. In other words, as the reserves fall due, the foreign nations that were holding on to our debt would get their reserves back. If the Federal Reserve is still trying to drain the economy, what it would do is to pay interest on reserves to keep the reserves at the Fed anyway. So the reserves would not be getting into circulation. On the other hand, if the foreign nations wanted to buy our goods, okay, or wanted to buy assets, then, as now, they would be sending the money back to us. It would go into non-foreign accounts. So I don't see that this changes the situation any. I think the repayment of all our debt instruments would actually create an impression among foreign governments as it's going on that, as promised, the United States always pays its debts when they fall due on time. Okay. Allison Drucker. Hey, Dr. Joe. Don't get your hopes up about at least the GOP, maybe them members of Congress, going for public purpose anytime soon, even after reading our letters. Okay, Allison. When the debt is no longer a problem, which I'm telling you, for the most part, is going to occur at 3 months after this gets into the appropriations bills. At that point in time, the deficit hawks among the Democrats are not going to be able to scream about the debt. They're not going to be able to scream about the problems of Social Security or the Medicare problems or the entitlement problems. They won't be able to claim that they're fiscal problems anymore. If someone from the progressive wing of the party then proposes an infrastructure program, no one will be able to say we can't afford it. If they propose a job guarantee program, no one will be able to say we can't afford it. Because when the appropriations bill passes, the money will be coming out of the Federal Reserve to afford it. It's a no-brainer. So no one will be able to say we can't afford it. All they'll be able to say is that's going to be inflationary. Then we're going to have a big argument over whether something is going to be inflationary or something is not going to be inflationary. Now, furthermore, when you consider whether something is going to be inflationary or non-inflationary, then the considerations of whether there's full employment or not are going to come in. And we'll be able to talk about all of the people who are still unemployed. It's only when full employment comes around and full employment is maintained will people be able to talk about inflation problems. But if we bring about full employment, And if we maintain full employment with deficit spending every year, as we're going to have to do, because people will still want to export more to us than they import from us, we'll still be having to run deficits of 10 to 12% a year, every year. Growing the economy, growing our economy each year. So Congress is going to get into that pattern. It won't have the excuse anymore that it can't do these things we need to have done because of that great big debt burden of $20 trillion. After the first year, that debt burden will probably be cut by $6 or $7 trillion. It'll probably be down to $13 trillion. And when they start screaming then about, oh, we got a $13 trillion debt, all you got to do is point to the appropriations bill and say, well, by the end of next year, we're probably going to have only an $8 trillion debt. And on and on and on. Because the debt will be going away and everybody will be able to see it every day. The excuse won't be there. And the Democrat who fails to get behind the progressive legislation using the full excuse that we've got a big debt problem is going to die out there. They're going to have to find other excuses. I think it's going to take them quite a while. Mark Fabian says, Dane's been paying close to 60% income tax for 22 years. No problem paying higher tax when you have health, education, job guarantees, etc. covered by your government. That's true. It really is no problem when you don't have any major expenses coming up because they're covered by the government. And Teresa says, we need to keep trying to spread the knowledge and understanding of MMT in the meantime. Absolutely. But this enables MMT education. Because when MMT says the United States is a monetary sovereign, after this language is in the appropriations bill, then everybody's going to say, yeah, the United States is a monetary sovereign. And when MMT starts off teaching people what it means to be a monetary sovereign, then the rest of MMT education is going to go a lot easier, believe me. Mark says, the misconception is the threat and the leverage being used as an excuse for bad behavior. Dispel the misconception and there is no perceived threat. I think that's correct. Dispel the misconception. Now, what have my MMT friends and myself been doing for the last 7.5 years since I've been involved? We've been trying to dispel the misconception through education. Various kinds of framings and language tricks and new wrinkles and cartoons and videos, and just a huge amount of effort has been devoted to trying to get the message out there to educate large numbers in the public so we could get some leverage behind deficit spending. This has worked some. I don't want to denigrate all our efforts. The last thing I want to do is to do that. And I would never suggest that we shouldn't be continuing those efforts. But I will tell you that if we get this language put into the appropriations bills, then that education process is going to go a lot faster, even though the appropriations language in these bills is not explicitly MMT. Even though it's not explicitly MMT, still, it's going to accelerate the acceptance of our message. And Real Progressive says, I agree, Dr. Joe, take the national debt scare tactics off the table. One less tool that neoliberals can use to fool the people into accepting pointless austerity and intentional poverty, okay, and unemployment. Okay, I guess that's Rocco again. What I would have to say about that is that is not just one less tool which the neoliberals use. It's their primary tool. It's their primary propaganda tool. The lie that taxes fund spending. The lie that the spending money that goes into the Treasury spending account can only come from taxes and from borrowing. These are at the heart of their propaganda campaigns and their political movement. When this is shown to be a lie by the effects of this language in the bill, what does this language mean? It means that Congress appropriates the funds for the Treasury spending account and orders that those funds be provided by the Federal Reserve. So it means, look, Ma, no hands, no tax money, and no bond money involved in this process. It proves that taxes don't fund spending. It makes that a highly visible maxim, I should say, of public financing. That's why I love it so much. Kathy Langan says, crying poor, quote, crying poor and spinning tales of woe about debts and deficits is the way government protects itself from the demands of its citizenry. A quote from Stephanie Kelton. Yes, yes. And this is the way to take away the ability to spin those tales of woe. Teresa Sanders says, at Allison, I think that's why Dr. Joe says the campaigns need to continue in waves, because it's going to take time and constant vigilance and repetition and efforts to throw people out who don't heed our call. I mean, we're going to have to defeat a few of them before this takes hold. I don't think it might immediately take hold with some candidates, and maybe they'll get in office and people will take note of that. But when it's really going to take hold is when people get beaten by candidates who accept our message and who put it into appropriations bills. That's when the chickens are going to come home to roost. And Mark Collins says debt for a currency user is a different structure than debt for a currency issuer. Yes, it's a much different structure. All that is true. However, there's still a liability, and there still has to be a repayment on the debt on the day that the liability falls due. Yes, the structure of repayment for a currency user is different from the repayment structure of a currency issuer. Yes, 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 yes. All true. All true. However, again, the debt instrument is still a liability, and the payment still has to be made when it falls due. So never say that is imaginary. That is not imaginary. The only imaginary thing is when you imagine that these debts of the sovereign are the same as the debts of the non-sovereigns. No, they're not the same. It's debt in a highly different sense. Remember what MMT says. The tax credits, that is money. Okay, money, cash, reserves, those are tax credits. And as such, they are debts of the sovereign. And MMT says there's no debt-free money. Yes, there is no debt-free money. But there is money that is consumer debt-free. There is money that is the government's debt alone. And that is the reserves it issues, and the cash it issues, and the coins that it issues. So what does government do? It uses one form of its debt to retire another form of its debt. It uses its reserves to retire its debt instruments. Why? Because Congress hasn't been putting the reserves in at the time of the appropriations, but instead has allowed the Treasury to issue debt instruments. I mean, the whole thing is about congressional choices and what made sense to them. Okay, and none of it really makes sense to us. So, I guess I've got to be ending this. It's almost 11 o'clock now, 10:57. Let me find something. Yes, Sandy, the Fixing the Debt book is on Amazon. It's the first Kindle book that I wrote. Was originally published in 2013, revised in early 2014. The revised edition is up on Amazon. It's called Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America. And then it's got some subtitle like austerity and tyranny, and stuff like that in the subtitle. And it's got a nice bright cover that I designed myself. Okay, but it's not a print book. Okay, it's an electronic book. It's a Kindle book. And Real Progressive says we would still have to pay interest on reserves, though we would not have that stupid, misleading debt clock going up. It's worth it. Absolutely. But when you say we would have to pay interest on reserves, we have to note the details in that. Right now, the Treasury is paying interest on the debt paper, and that's what's creating the debt clock, because the Treasury owes the interest. Okay? So, when the Fed is going to pay that interest in pursuit of its mandate to control inflation, its duty under the law, no one will say that the interest rates are about the Fed's debt, or that the interest payments are about the debts of the Fed. They won't be about the debts of the Fed. They'll just be interest which the Fed pays to savers. That's all. I mean, the reserves at the Fed are going to be savings then. And the Fed will be paying interest on savings, just like other banks do. Guess what? Fantastic. Mark Collins says, you folks have done this for many years, have the patience of a large rock with people more stubborn than most mules. Well, okay, the people are not the only stubborn ones. Russell Gorman, what is it that the PGPF is trying to extract? Well, I can't say exactly, but I do know that starting in the 1970s, Peter G. Peterson himself, who must be 90 years old by now, had this dream. And his dream was to privatize Social Security. The thought of doing that first arose, I believe, during the Nixon administration. And Peter G. Peterson was, if I recall correctly, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce. And it was an early point in his career of going back and forth between government agencies, high up in government agencies, okay, and into the private sector, very often into nonprofit groups and think tanks in the private sector. Then, I guess during the 1990s, he helped to found Blackstone, I think, if I recall correctly, but it's in my book anyway. I have two books which are basically on real fiscal responsibility that address in great detail the Peterson Foundation and the goings-on of its network, okay, in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And in that book, I detail the career, okay, of Peter G. Peterson and how he made his billions. He only made billions, actually, fairly late in 2004. He was very rich before, but he was not a billionaire before that, when he made a killing when Blackstone went public. And he made, I think, $3 billion in that particular transaction. And he took $1 billion of it and invested it in his dream, which was to use the ideology of fiscal responsibility to finally convince people that they needed to privatize Social Security. And when that was done, he expected to make another bundle, but he pursued that white whale, his Moby Dick, throughout his life. And his legacy is a network of think tanks and institutions in Washington and New York who still follow the neoliberal ideology. And okay, Rocco says in his guise as real progressives to Sandy, we need growth, but we can grow with green, sustainable, and energy infrastructure. Yes, we can, Rocco. Yes, we can. And at Russell, what is PGPF Precious? The Peter G. Peterson Foundation, founded by Peter G. Peterson in 2007. With it was said $1 billion. The figures I saw seemed to bring that down to about $600 million, but there might have been some other money involved. Yes, Peter G. Peterson Foundation, right. Correct. Oh, also, by the way, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, CRFB, something like that. Yeah, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. That particular institution in Washington is virtually a creature of the Peterson Foundation. Okay. It gets major money from the Peterson Foundation. Now, it existed before that because Peterson had other sources of funds that were going into it before that. It's existed for many years. But it's like the chief think tank in Washington. Every year is testifying to the Congress. And every year is out there with debt and deficit scares. Now, they are consistent about wanting to tax also to achieve fiscal responsibility. But of course, what happens is their propaganda stuff is used by the right, the hard right, to advocate for spending cuts. But they forget about the part of the Peterson message that talks about raising taxes. Now, they don't want to have anything to do with that, of course, because that's their money, not ours, they say, or they think. Kathy kindly says, don't forget to support Joe at www.josemfirestone /bio. That's my website. There is a link on the website over on the side to Patreon, where I have an account, and where if you're so inclined, kindly, you can become a patron of mine. Okay, and Kathy Langan was my first patient. I'm sorry, the patron, not my first patient, but my first patron. She's now not my only patron, but she's still my first patron. And so, Stacy Van Veen says, cat food billionaire. Yes. The famous Fiscal Commission on, what was it called? The National Commission for Fiscal Responsibility and something or other. I forget the full name now, even though I wrote a full book on that. Anyway, that commission was dubbed by Fire Dog Lake and Jane Hampshire in particular, the Cat Food Commission. Okay, because it was theorized that if they were successful in cutting Social Security, and Medicare, and going through with its fiscal responsibility plans, that the end result would be that people on Social Security would be eating more cat food. So yes, Peterson is often called the cat food billionaire because he was the man behind that commission. In fact, he donated the money to the administration so they could run the commission because they couldn't get an appropriation from Congress for it, and they couldn't get Congress to constitute it as a fiscal commission of the Congresses. Congress wanted more cover than that. So the president, Obama at the time, Mr. Sweetness himself, decided that he was going to constitute the commission in the executive branch. Only problem was he didn't have any money. So what happened? Peter G. Peterson gave him a couple of million, or however much it was, to run the Cat Food Commission, which tried to advocate, among other things, for the chained CPI, which is a new CPI for the that would be used for Social Security, that works in the following way. It's based on the food basket of the elderly. So, let's say the elderly have to compromise, economize on their food bills by switching from some expensive food to less expensive food. And this goes on all over the country and is reflected in the measurements of their food basket. Well, then the next year, it will be calculated that the elderly need a lesser amount for food. And so then their cost of living adjustment will be smaller or non-existent because they need less money for food. And this, of course, will go on from year to year to year. And the CBO has projected that many, many thousands of dollars in cost will be borne by the elderly because of the failure to give them fair cost of living adjustments if the chain CPI were used. So Obama was never able to pass the chain CPI. Well, guess what? The Trump tax bill that was just passed, the chain CPI went sailing through as part of that tax bill. It's part of that tax bill right now. So here's Trump, who's promising no cuts in Social Security for the elderly, and here's Trump about to sign a bill with a chain CPI in it. Oh, yes. We have a bunch of tricky bastards running the government, don't we? Tricky bastards. Okay, and Stacey Van Veen recalls a la Simpson Bowles. Yes, the Fiscal Commission was run by Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. And so it was originally called by many the BS Commission. And then the group studiously never called itself the Bowles-Simpson Commission again, but shifted it over to Simpson-Bowles. All kinds of funny things were going on with people making fun of this commission. The fun was not actually trivial. I think it had a role in defeating what the commission was trying to do, which was something very serious. And that was to get people to hate Social Security so much that they would accept its privatization without a whimper. Social Security would end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Is there an interest in a book study for any of Joe's or other books, on MMT? I don't know, but since I've written 7 books, that deal with MMT, 7 Kindle books, I would hope there would be some interest in book study of those on the part, of RP people. In fact, I'd be happy to teach the classes myself. If enough RP people were to buy the books. I love to teach, as you may have gathered. Anyway, Rocco says, reducing fiscal deficits starves the domestic private sector, forcing us into tons of private credit/debt, which leads to booms, busts, and bailouts, and again, only helps the rich. And those bailouts mean government moves back into big deficits anyway, just too late and funnel to the top, not giving any relief to the working class. Yep. That's the process, Rocco, if in fact Real Progressives is still Rocco at this late hour. Perhaps someone else has taken over our label. And Trish Roberts says, yes, I'm interested, Mark. Thank you, Trish. Ellen T says, interested in joining Mark Fabian. Thank you, Ellen. I think I might be running out of comments about now. Can't tell, of course, but I just got okay, I'm trying to get some. Oh, here it goes. Okay. Alison Drucker says, I hear there's a COLA of 2% as of 1/01/2018. Yes, and that's not even with the chain CPI. In other words, the chain CPI would have been lower than that. Yeah, they basically set it at the rate of the CPI. Now, for the elderly, the CPI is not fair. And the reason why the CPI is not fair is because medical expenses take up a much greater portion of the income of the elderly than they generally do for younger people. Of course, this starts really at age 55 or so, but gets worse gradually up through your 70s. And I can tell you, as you reach your latter 70s, you get some major expenses that if they're not covered by Medicare plus a private policy from what Medicare does not cover, then you're in danger of losing most of your savings. And with the way private insurance is going, expenses are getting higher and higher. It's tough for people who live on Social Security because the deductions for Medicare are the same. And after Medicare deductions, even if they don't have any supplementary policies, many people could be walking away with $400, $500, $600 a month. And people really can't live on that. So many of them are getting helped by their children. Thank you, Russell. There's a thought I certainly appreciate. And Trish says, you could teach me, Rocco. You and Mark know a lot. Yes, they do know a lot, Trish. They do know a lot. And Russell Gorman says, my generation has savings. Well, there are many people in your generation, Russell, which is a little younger than my generation, I think, that do have some savings, but their savings will start to take a beating if they don't keep working after 65. And by the time they get into their latter 70s, if they don't have very secure income from their savings and also pretty hefty Social Security payments as well, they will begin to have some difficulties. Okay. I think we need to close. First of all, I don't see many comments that are coming, so I think that people are tired, and I'm tired also, and we have only 26 diehards who left. So I want to thank you all. I hope you'll share this so the message gets out, because it would be truly a shame if the people who developed MMT and who were most responsible for its spread step on their own public purpose message through some reasoning that's problematic about what an operational constraint is as opposed to what a political constraint is, or some faulty reasoning about how framing works and how false frames are defeated, and how sometimes it may be important to reinforce a small frame for a short period of time in order to break that frame. How sometimes it may be needed to use a little reverse leverage on these frames. and a little cognitive jujitsu in order to break the frames. It's not straightforward that by working to get rid of the debt in the way that I've suggested, it's not a simple matter to conclude that that's going to reinforce the frame, and so that's not the best way to do it. But instead, it's better to keep the debt around at a zero interest rate and growing, because it doesn't result in an initial reinforcing of the frame. I don't think that reasoning actually works. Doesn't work for me. Maybe that's because I'm a political scientist, okay, and not an economist. And Allison has to take her dog out. Thank you, Dr. J. By the way, I shared 65 times. Thank you very much, Allison. I'm sure that will be very helpful tomorrow, and then I'll get a spring on this then. I hope so, because I think this has a really valuable message in it. Okay, thank you all. I am really going to end now because I can't keep going all night. And I don't think I'd have any audience left. So here we go. Good night, all, and I'll see you again on Saturday.